Next up, we move on to just an unfortunate tragedy. We certainly send our condolences out to the Mayweather family because this week, legendary boxer and boxing trainer, most folks only know him recently for his boxing training, which of course was quite good, but he is much more than that. Roger Mayweather passed away, I think, at the age of 58, and what they're calling essentially him succumbing to his illness. I've not heard it described exactly, but no one has suggested that it had nothing to do with a life spent in boxing and some of the damage that he had taken. Brian, we're talking about what his biggest legacy is and his biggest accomplishment. Like, what did he bring to the sport? And I was going through and I was watching some of his old fights. First of all, a lot of folks should recognize this. He was the original Black Mamba. Obviously, shouts to Kobe. What a sportsman. Truly one of the best of our era, irrespective of sport. But the original Black Mamba was Roger Mayweather. He was the guy that wore that crown at a time I don't think anyone had up to that point inside the squared circle. So first I want to say I always found that kind of fun. Secondly, I would say this was a guy who was a two-weight world champion. And yes, he lost to, I think, Chavez twice during his era. There were some other noteworthy losses he had along the way. It wasn't the same distinguished record as Floyd, which I think gets a lot of folks confused about how good of a boxer that he was. But he won at, I think, junior lightweight and junior welterweight. So he was a two-weight world champion, and he beat some great fighters along the way. And he also had some great wars. Now, maybe some of those were what contributed to problems down the road, but a lot of times he was not expected to win. A lot of times he would go to his opponent's territory and be in their home area. I think he won his second of his two world titles doing that in Puerto Rico. And so you really get a respect for him. Here was a guy who could do it all in the global sense of boxing. I don't mean global in a geographic sense, Brian. I mean global in the sense of everything you can have in a boxing life. Can you be a good fighter? Yes. Can you be a good trainer? Yes. Can you be good on the mic? How many times did Roger Mayweather say, people don't know shit about boxing? He was famous about that. And he also just had a real keen understanding of human psyche, of what made people work. He has a famous quote when someone asked him, what Floyd has all this money, Floyd Jr., he has all this money, he has all this celebrity, why does he keep fighting? And he said, hey, you know how Bill Gates got $1 billion and he still make them fucking computers? That's Floyd. And I just thought it was such a smart and easy way to describe it, but it homes in on something really kind of true about the nature of the big greats. And the last thing I'll say is, I think some of the lessons, Brian, that he learned from his career, yes, he was able to impart on Floyd when he trained him, and Floyd Sr. had their falling out as a technician, as a tactician. That too. But I think he had lost to Costa Tszyu in 96 or so, right when Floyd Jr.'s career as a pro was getting going. I can't say this for any kind of certainty, Brian, but part of me wonders if Floyd Jr. took some of the tactical smarts that Roger was able to employ in him, and just observing kind of what the fight game had done to Roger as a competitor, and then taking those lessons in and incorporating that into a fight style and then as a business strategy.
Certainly as a fighting business strategy. Now, Floyd's gone on record in the past, and obviously, this is a fighting family, the Mayweathers, and Floyd Jr. had the glove, was hitting doorknobs as a 2-year-old in his playpen. So this was a guy who was groomed for success. And obviously, of the three Mayweather brothers, Floyd Sr., Roger, and Jeff, Roger had the best pro career by far. And as you mentioned, Floyd's gone on record and said he saw the end of Roger's career up close, saw the punishment he regularly took in order to stay in those fights, and wanted to be the opposite of that. So that certainly played a large influence, and that was right around the time in the late 90s that the falling out, like you mentioned with Floyd Sr., when he went away to jail and sort of left Floyd, he taught Floyd how to fight, and suddenly Uncle Roger was there to nurture him, helped him start as a pro, come out of the Olympics, become an early pound-for-pound king. People forget, right around 2000, 2001, and then eventually become the crossover pay-per-view star that he became, the largest star in history. But Mayweather Promotions did put out a statement that gave the cause of death to diabetes, and we had seen Roger step away from the spotlight. He left Floyd's corner right around 2013, 2014 for good as Floyd Sr. came back in. But you look at Roger, and certainly I think the greatest contribution to this business was being the trainer of the most successful fighter of this era. And he was such a calming influence in there. And I know there was always that narrative that, Floyd was so great, he trained himself, it didn't matter. But Roger was certainly someone who Floyd respected, who had the ear of. He wanted to hear what Roger had to say. And Luke, you've seen the videos a million times. That relationship they had with Floyd hitting the pads as Uncle Roger would hold him up and slap back at him, it became a dance. It became this thing they did that is sort of indelibly burned into your mind. When you see that, you know a big fight's coming, and it just really put into focus the relationship that they had, the trust that they had. He played a monster role in that. And I think even bigger, although this is sort of a lesser note, he became quite a personality. As you know, the idea of these pre-fight documentary shows, whether it was 24/7 on HBO or Showtime's All Access, really gave you that inside look behind the fighters. Roger was an early star in that. It wasn't just the hashtag YDSAB, you don't know shit about boxing. It was, the back and forth with Freddie Roach ahead of the Floyd-Oscar fight. Roger really showed you just how hilarious he was. He had a few missteps outside of the ring as well, but this was a guy who was a lifer. You mentioned how underrated he was as a fighter. He was the Mexican assassin, the Mexicutioner. Won titles in 2 divisions. Yes, maybe lost his biggest ones against the Custazuz, twice to Julio Cesar Chavez. But, he's got wins over Vinny Pazienza, Livingstone Bramble. This guy really gave a lot to this business, and it was tough to see him sort of take a step back as his health declined in recent years. And certainly tough to see him go during a very hard time in the Mayweather family in general. As we know, Floyd lost his longtime girlfriend, Josie Harris, the mother of a few of his children, at age 40. So tough time in the Mayweather clan at the moment, but Roger gave a lot to the sport, and he was always a joy to walk up to and get a quote from him. Big fan of the Black Mamba.
And it also tells you too that Floyd is in terms of a professional career, he's just one of the best ever. But to be that, it requires such a command of oneself. But you have to have an incredible supporting cast, too. All the stars kind of have to align. And that you can do that, essentially, while keeping everything in-house in the family is kind of... you've seen it, a father and son relationship, or uncle and nephew relationship in individual instances, Brian. You've certainly seen that, or even that uncle train other people. But to have 3 brothers, as you indicated, and then 1 child who could do it, and then to develop this brand around a boxing gym, and more than that, dude, they're the first family of boxing, right? I don't know who would be beyond them, certainly for this generation. And that's an impossible thing virtually to become, but it's an underscore the fact that whatever people think of Floyd and what he accomplished, there is a bigger Mayweather story that needs to be told. And a lot of it got told through Floyd, which is not the worst way to get told, right? Because he is sort of the son and everything was kind of revolving around him. At the same time, you can't forget the individual greats in their own right. You mentioned that Roger had Floyd with Freddie Roach. I was there for Mayweather-Pacquiao. I'm sure you were too when they had the coaches' press conference. Floyd Sr. was doing the exact same thing when he was talking to Freddie. They just had a way of going back and forth with any of their rivals. And to do that in-house, it's so incredible that they were what they were. And they were interesting on their own, Brian, and then they were something greater than the sum of their parts when they were together.
And in closing, shout out to Roger in that 2006 Mayweather-Zab Judah fight. You remember that melee when Zab Judah started throwing dirty shots? Roger was the first one in there, took a swing from Yoel Judah. He took a shot at Zab. He ended up getting a 1-year suspension from the Nevada Commission, but that just showed you who he was, Luke.
He certainly was. He was not all talk, Brian Campbell.